Here we go. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Mishnah Mastery. What a long time it has been, but we are going to crack on tonight with Maseches Zevachim, chapter 7, and hopefully chapter 8 as well. Let me try that one again. Chapter 6 and chapter 7. They're not easy chapters, so we will do our best, and the end gets a little bit gory, but I'll certainly do my best with it. And apologies for putting us all into a breakout room. There's going to be people logging on around 8:30, so this just gets us out of the way. So with that in mind, let's get the words for the Mishnah up on the screen. Can everyone see that okay? Excellent. So we're going to be starting with chapter 6 of Maseches Zevachim, and we're going to be talking about the way in which we would perform the mincha offering, which was kind of like the subsidiary additional parts that would come along with the korban, and bird offerings. There's two types of bird offerings: the chatas, the sin bird offering, and the olah, and the fully consumed bird offering. If you recall, the last chapter that we did went through all the different types of sacrifices and where all the different processes happen, and so we kind of almost mirror that same kind of structure with the first Mishnah over here. So let's remember, with birds, we're not doing shchita, we are doing malika, which is a process by which a kohen with a very sharp thumbnail would sever the bird's neck. And we'll see also as we go along through all of this, there was a process in which the blood of the bird would be smeared onto the mizbeach. So we're going to come to all of these things in greater depth. So here we go. By way of some introduction, you could theoretically, biblically, slaughter an animal on the mizbeach itself, on the altar. The Rabbi said we shouldn't do that because we don't really want live animals roaming around on the ramp and on the mizbeach in case they end up going to the toilet. But biblically speaking, an animal could be slaughtered on the mizbeach itself. When it comes to kodshei kodshim, the higher level of sacrifices, they were supposed to be slaughtered on the north side of the azar, on the north side of the courtyard. But what's the deal if you were to slaughter it on the south side of the mizbeach? So we're going to take a little look at that as well. And when it comes to menachos, when it comes to a mincha, these flour offerings that came along with a korban, in general they were classified as kodshei kodshim, the higher class of sacrifice. And I guess the equivalent of the shechita part of that process would be what's called the kamitza, the gathering of the fistful of flour, which would be burnt on the mizbeach. They would take a fistful of flour and oil and frankincense, and it would be burnt on the mizbeach. But that doesn't need to be done on the northern side specifically. So let's see if we can now understand a little bit about Mishnah Aleph. Kodshei kodshim sheshachatan barosh hamizbeach. If you have the higher level of sacrifices which get slaughtered on the top of the mizbeach, Rabbi Yossi says, Ki'ilu nishchatu b'tzafon. It's as if they were slaughtered on the northern side, which is where they were supposed to be slaughtered. So Rabbi Yossi is saying that is okay, that is valid. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says, Machatzi hamizbeach v'latzafon katzafon. If you were shechting it on the northern part of the northern half of the altar, then that is going to be like you have shechted it in the north, and it's going to be valid. Or if you went from the midpoint southwards, and that's where you were slaughtering the animal, then the Mishnah says, according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, it's going to be deemed like you slaughtered it in the southern side, and so he's going to say that it is disqualified. Says the Mishnah, when it came to taking the kamitza, the fistful of flour from these minchas, that could be done in any part in the courtyard. And it would be eaten within the curtains, within the enclosure of the Beis HaMikdash, by the male kohanim, b'chol ma'achal, in any way of preparing the food, le'yom v'layla ad chatzos. for a day and a night until Chatzos. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Base, we're going to be talking about birds. And as I said, we don't have shechita for a bird sacrifice. We have a process called Melika. Outside of the Beis HaMikdash, if you wanted to eat a bird, then it would have shechita. But inside the Beis HaMikdash, for the sake of korbanos, we're doing a process called Melika. And then there was a difference, depending on what type of sacrifice it was. A chatas ha'of, a sin bird offering, or an olatz ha'of, a fully consumed bird offering. The question would be whether you have to detach the head from the body to be able to process the blood or not. Also, when it comes to an animal chatas, the blood would be sprinkled on the upper half of the mizbeach, but with a bird chatas, it would be sprinkled on the lower half of the mizbeach, right? If you remember, we said there's a line that goes around a red line that went around the perimeter of the mizbeach. So the animal chatas would be sprinkled above, and the bird one would be sprinkled below. An animal ola, the fully consumed animal, would be sprinkled on the lower half of the mizbeach, and the ola sa'af, the bird fully consumed offering, would be sprinkled on the upper half of the mizbeach. Says the Mishnah, chatas sa'af, the sin bird offering. The blood would be sprinkled on the corner of the, so it's on the lower half of the mizbeach, in the southwestern corner of the altar. B'chol makom ha'isa kashera wouldn't be invalidated if you did it anywhere else, right? B'chol makom ha'isa kashera, it would still be valid if you did it in any other place. But this was the official location, below the red line in the southwestern corner of the mizbeach. Next, we're going to be talking about 6 processes that were done in this location, in the southwestern side. 3 were going to be done on the lower part, and 3 would be done midway up the ramp, on the upper part of the mizbeach. So the Mishnah says, Ushlosha Devarim Haisa Osa HaKeren Mishameshes Milamata. There were 3 processes that were performed in this place, in the lower part, like on the floor, as it were, of this corner. So we're going to see Melika of Chatas Ha'of, which we've just said, snipping the neck. Number 2 is going to be approaching the southwestern corner of the mizbeach with the korban mincha. That would be done in that place, and shiyare hadam, and any blood left over from korbanos would be spilled in that corner as well. So says the Mishnah, the 3 things that would be done, mishameshes milamata, 3 things on the bottom half, shlosha milamala, and 3 things halfway up the mizbeach. Says the Mishnah, milamata, the lower half, what would it be? Chatas ha'of, it would be the melika of the bird offering, the sin bird offering, v'hahagashos, the approaching and touching the mizbeach with the mincha, the korban mincha, the flour offerings, v'shiare hadam, and leftover blood from a sacrifice would be poured out in this lower part of the corner. Milamala, the upper part, nisuch hamayim, on Sukkos, they would have a funnel in the southwestern corner at the top to pour the water libations down. V'hayayin, and with the daily korban tamid, morning and afternoon, there would be wine that gets poured down the top of the mizbeach. Va'olas ha'of, and the fully burnt up bird offering, keshehi rabba mizrach. So officially, when you sprinkle the blood of the olas ha'of, you're supposed to do it on the southeastern side, because you had to throw parts of the bird off the eastern side, so it made sense. But if they had too many birds coming in, then they would do it on the southwestern side, and then they would have to just fling the bird bits over the mizbeach onto the eastern side. So if there was too much going on the eastern side, then the Mishnah says the 3rd process that would take place in the top half of the southwestern side was the olas ha'of. Mishnah Gimel. we're going to see three things for which you would be going up and then turning left and then retracing your steps. Why would we want to do that? Well, let's see what they are first. Kol ha'olim la-mizbeach. Anybody who was going up the ramp of the Mizbeach, olin derech yamin, would go up on the right side of the Mizbeach, of the ramp. Umakifin v'yordin derech small. And they would go anti-clockwise around the altar and then come down the ramp on the left-hand side, with the exception of three things. Chutz min ha'ola l'shlosha devarim elim, except for the person who is going up to do one of these three things. Shahayu olim v'chozrim le'aked. They would go up and turn left, and then they would retrace their steps. So what were the three things? I think, for the three things that we just mentioned, you would go up, turn left, and retrace your steps. And the reason for that was that the water for Sukkot, the wine for the daily Tamid offering, and the Olas Ha'of, you didn't want to get these things damaged from the smoke that was going up, happening on the Mizbeach. So you would not ever want to drink wine or water that was smoky, and so it would be disrespectful to Hashem for us to go around the Mizbeach and get the water and the wine smoky, and you don't want a bird to be choking before you do Malika to it, because that would invalidate it. So for the bird as well, where you're shechting at the top of the altar, you would want to go up and then go straight to the left corner there, where you are going to be processing the bird. Mishnah Daled, we're going to be talking about the normal process for a chatas ha'of. Says the Mishnah, chatas ha'of ketzad haisanases. How would one perform the procedure for a sin bird offering? Says the Mishnah, haya molek es rosha mimul orpan. You would do malika to the back of the neck of this bird. Ve'eno mavdil, you would not detach it from the body. Umaze midama al kir hamizbeach, and you would squeeze the remaining blood onto the wall of the mizbeach. So you're doing this on the lower part of the mizbeach, and you're shaking the bird to be able to do that, and you're squeezing it against the wall so that the blood is stripping out. As I said, it's a little bit gory. Sheyare hadam, the rest of the blood, hayam mismatze ala yesod, it would be squeezed out of the body of the bird, al hayesad, at the foundation, at the base of the mizbeach. Ein la mizbeach el adama v'chula la kohanim. It's only the blood that went on the mizbeach, and the rest of the bird would then be given to the kohanim for their consumption. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Hey, Olas ha'af ketzad haisan na'ases. How would you perform the procedure for an olas ha'af? So we said it's going to be done on the southeastern side, so that you can discard what you need to get rid of on the eastern side. So the Mishnah says, Alav hakeresh ufan ala sovev. You're going to go up the ramp, and you're going to face to go around the ramp. Balol lekeren dromis mizrachis. When you get to the southeastern corner, haya molekes rosha, you're going to do malika to the head of the bird, nimul orpa, to the back of the neck, umavdil, and you are going to detach it from the rest of the body. Umamatza es dama al kira mizbeach, and you're going to squeeze the blood out onto the wall of the altar. Says the Mishnah, not al esarosh, you're going to take the head, the hikif base milikaso la mizbeach, and you are going to the hikif. What's vehikif? Vehikif base milikasa la mizbeach. What does that mean? You're going to put it, the place where you've severed it, that's going to go onto the fire of the altar. Usafago bamelach, and you're going to saturate the blood with salt. Uzraka al gabe ha'ishim, and you're going to throw the head onto the fire. That's where you're throwing it. So what's vehikif base milikasa? You took the head and neared the place. Oh, I see. You're bringing the head near to the altar in order to squeeze the blood. You're absorbing the blood with salt, and then you're throwing the head onto the fire. Balo laguf, then you're coming to the head, to the body. Vehesir es hamura ves hanotza. You're removing the food sack, which they translate there as the crop, and the feathers from the bird, which are attached to it, and the intestines, which are coming out of it. And those parts you're throwing onto the Beis Hadeshin. That's what you're tossing off to the eastern side, towards where the ashes are. Which is why if you were on the far side, you'd have to lob it over the Mizbeach. Shisa velo hivdil, says the Mishnah, if you rip the bird, if you snap the spine and you didn't detach it, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to rip the bird lengthwise, it says there, to snap the spine, but to not separate the bird. The imhivdil kasher, but the Mishnah says that if the bird had been detached and separated, then it would still be valid. And you would saturate the remaining parts of the bird with salt, and then you would throw it onto the fire to be fully consumed. That, my friends, was the Olas Ha'of that they would do in the Beis HaMikdash. Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Vav. Lo hesir, lo esamura, velo esanosa. What if you didn't remove the food sack, the crop, or the feathers? Velo es b'nei me'ayim, hayotzin nima, or the innards, the intestines. Velo sfagol b'melach, or you didn't saturate it with blood. Says the Mishnah, Kol sheshina ba me'acha shemitza es dama kashera. If you omit something, if you get something wrong after you have squeezed the blood out, then it's still going to be kosher. So in general, if you've done the blood part, then you can't mess it up. You can't invalidate it afterwards. But the Mishnah says, Hivdil b'chatas, if you've detached the chatas offering, v'lo hivdil ba'ola, and you didn't detach the head from the body of an ola, the Mishnah says pasula. It had to be done in that way properly. Mitzad dam harosh v'lo mitzad dam aguf. If you did the squeezing of the blood of the head and you didn't do the squeezing of the blood of the body, says the Mishnah, pasula, then it won't be valid. You didn't do the sprinkling properly. Mitzad dam aguf v'lo mitzad dam harosh keshera. But if you did sprinkle the blood or squeeze the blood of the body and you hadn't squeezed the blood of the head, then because at least you've done the sprinkling correctly of the body, the Mishnah says it's going to be kosher. Says the Mishnah Zion. So we saw with sacrifices that you can invalidate a korban with the wrong thoughts. And if you recall, we said that you have to have you can't be thinking about the wrong time and you can't be thinking about the wrong place. So with the animals, there were 4 processes that you could get that wrong. There was the shechita, there was the Kabbalah, the collecting of the blood, the transporting of the blood, and the sprinkling of the blood. But we don't have all of those processes by a bird. So when it comes to a bird, there's only 2 services that can invalidate it. There's the malika, which is the equivalent of shechita. There's the snipping of the neck, and the sprinkling of the blood, the zrika. So this Mishnah is going to parallel what we saw in the animal sacrifices. We're going to see that a chatas ha'of, a sin bird offering, can be disqualified by thoughts which are shelo lishma, which you have the wrong name given to a korban, but it's not going to be invalidated if it was a olat ha'of, right? So that is consistent, if we remember all the way back to chapter 1, that is consistent with chapter 1, Mishnah 1 as well. So with that in mind, let's see if we can get our heads around this final Mishnah. It's quite a long Mishnah, but it's the final Mishnah here of chapter 6. It says the Mishnah, Chatas ha'of, shemalaka shelo lishma. So you've got a bird sin offering, which you have done malika with the wrong name attributed to it. Or mitzadama shelo lishma, or you've squeezed the blood with the wrong name. Or lishma v'shelo lishma, you did one part of the process with the right name, one part of the process with the wrong name. Or shelo lishma v'lishma, or vice versa. You started off with the wrong name, and then you had you did the squeezing with the right name. The Mishnah says psula, it's disqualified. Ola sa'of kashera. With an ola sa'of, if it was shelo lishma, if you had the wrong name for it, it would still be kosher, but the owner would not fulfill his obligation. Echad chata sa'of, ve'echad ola sa'of. Whether it's a sin bird offering or a olat ha'of, a consumed bird offering, Shemlakan v'shematzan daman. You've done the malika or the sprinkling of the blood with the intention that le'echol davar shadar kol le'echol, that you're going to eat something which is ordinarily eaten by people. Lahaktir davar shadar kol lahaktir, or you're going to burn something which would ordinarily be burnt. So if it was a chatas and you intended to burn it, which we don't do, or it was an olah and you intended to eat it, which you don't do. So the Mishnah says, chutz limakomo, if you had the intention to do it in the wrong place, pasul, it's going to be disqualified for ein bo kares, and there's no punishment of kares. So just for me to clarify, because I think I said that a little bit wrong, if it is a chatas, which you say, I'm going to eat it, but I'm going to eat it in the wrong place, or it's an olah, which you say, I'm going to burn it, but I'm going to burn it in the wrong place, that the Mishnah is saying is pasul ve'ein bo kares. Chutz lizmano, if you say that you're going to have the wrong time, then the Mishnah says, pigul v'chayavin alav kares. Then it is going to be pigul, and you are going to be chayav kares if you eat it. Uvilvad sheyikrav hamatir kemitzvasa, as long as the rest of the procedure was done correctly. Meaning, as long as the only invalidating thought was a chutz lizmano thought. So the Mishnah says, Ketzad karev hamatir kemitzvasa. Please explain what it means that you've done the rest of the process correctly. Says the Mishnah, Molak bishtika, you snipped the neck in silence with the right intention, umitza hadam chutz lizmano, and then you squeezed the blood with the wrong intention of chutz lizmano, outside of its designated time frame. Or shemalak chutz lizmano, when you did malika, you have the wrong intention, umitza hadam bishtika, and when you squeezed the blood, you did it in silence without any other interfering thoughts. Or shemalak umitza hadam chutz lizmano, you did both parts of the process with the wrong intention. Mishnah says, Zeh shekari v'matik mitzvasa. That is what it means to do the rest of it in the right way, and that is what's going to make it pigul. Okay, so lo kari v'matik mitzvasa. What does it mean then if we're not doing it in this way? Molak chutz lizmano. If you had, molak chutz limakomo. If you had a mindset of the wrong place when you did malika, umitza adam chutz lizmano, and when you did the squeezing of the blood, you had the wrong time mindset, or vice versa, or when you did malika, you had the wrong time in mind, and when you did the blood, you had the wrong place in mind, or when you did both processes, you had the wrong place in mind. When you were doing a sin bird offering, you snipped it with the wrong name, and when you squeezed the blood, you had a wrong time mindset. Or when you did malika, you had the wrong time. And when you did the blood, you had the wrong name. Or you did both of those processes with the wrong name. That is going to disqualify it, but it doesn't make it pigul because you haven't done the rest of the process correctly. Says the Mishnah, if a person has the intention to eat an olive's bulk outside the base of Mikdash and an olive's bulk the following day, or you have the intention of eating an olive's bulk the following day and and an olive's bulk outside in the wrong place, or you intend to eat half an olive's bulk outside, half an olive's bulk tomorrow, or you plan to eat a chatzi zayis tomorrow and a chatzi zayis in the wrong place. Mishnah says pasul ve'ein bo kares. Remember we said that, we're going to see what we're going to say. So it's pasul and there's no punishment of kares. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Zeh haklal. This was the rule, which we saw in the last animal sacrifices as well. Im mechasheves hazman, kadman mechasheves hamakom pigul. Rabbi Yehuda says that if you have the wrong time followed by the wrong place, it can be pigul v'chayavin alav kares. It can be pigul and you'll be liable for kares. V'machasheves hamakom kadman mechasheves hazman. But if you have the wrong place before the wrong time, pasul ve'ein bo kares, and it can only be pasul, can only be disqualified. It can't be pigul. There's no punishment of kares if a person eats it. But the chachamim say, the chachamim are in zev azel pasul. If you have multiple types of thoughts, it's going to be pasul. The only way it can be pigul is if you only have the wrong time intention. So pasul ve'ein bo kares. It can only be disqualified, and there's no punishment of kares. Le'achol kachatzi zayis u'lahaktir kachatzi zayis. So if a person intends to eat half an olive's bulk and to burn half an olive's bulk, kasher, then there's nothing doing she'ein achila v'haktar mitzarfin, because threatening to eat something and threatening to burn something, they do not combine to make the required shiur of a kazayas. They're two different processes, and they don't combine to make a kazayas. Mazel tov, everybody, on completing chapter 6, and we'll move straight on, unless we want to stop for questions. We'll move on with chapter 7. Hands in the air for questions? No hands in the air. Everyone has understood everything that I have said with perfect, flawless ease. Incredible. Okay, so chapter 7, we're going to be talking again about olas ha'of, bird offerings that are olas, and bird offerings that are chatas, sin offerings, and what can make them invalid. And we're going to see that there are 3 fundamental differences, 3 fundamental things that are in play here. We need to figure out where they have been processed, right? The chatas, we said, has to be on the floor, the lower part of the mizbeach, and the olah has to be the upper part of the mizbeach. It's going to depend on malika, right? The chatas remains attached, the head to the body, and the olah has to be detached. And then the sprinkling, the chatas has a pressing process and a squeezing process, and the olah just has a pressing process to get the blood out. And then on top of that, a chatas gets eaten and an olah gets burnt up. So the Mishnah says, chatas ha'of she'asa lamata. If you did a chatas, the process, you did it in the bottom part of the mizbeach. Kamase chatas l'shem chatas, and you did the actions of the chatas with the right intentions, you did it all correctly. Mishnah says, kashera, kosher, valid, done and Dunsky. What about kamase chatas l'shem olah? What if you do the procedure for a chatas offering, but you have in mind that you're doing it for an olah offering? Or kamase olah l'shem chatas, or you process an olah with the intention that it's a chatas. Or kamase olah l'shem olah, or you are taking a chatas and you're performing the procedure of an olah with the intention of an olah, pasula, then it's invalidated. And also, asala mala kamase chulam, if you process the chatas in the top part of the mizbeach, whichever way you're processing it, either like a chatas or like an olah, pasula, it's going to be disqualified. Says the Mishnah, what about with an olah? So, with an olah, we don't have the same concern about the right name, doing it lishma. That was a problem for the chatas, but it's not a problem for the olah. So it can still be kosher, you just won't be yotzi your obligation. You won't fulfill your obligation. Says the Mishnah, olah sa'of sha'asa lamala. If you process the olah in the top part of the altar, kamase olah, l'shem olah, kashera. And you've done everything correctly, it's kosher. Kamase olah, l'shem chatas, if you do it as a process of an olah, but with the mindset that it's a chatas, then it's still kosher. Like we pointed out before, but the owner will not fulfill his obligation. What about kamase chatas l'shem olah? What if you process it like a chatas, but with the right name, with the right designation, with the right intention? Kamase chatas l'shem chatas, or you process this olah like a chatas with the name of a chatas. Mishnah says psula, it's disqualified. Asa lamata, if you process it in the lower part of the mizbeach on the ground, kamase kulam, and even if you did it correctly, whichever way you're doing it, psula, it's going to be disqualified. And the Mishnah says in Mishnah Gimel, v'chulam einon metamos beveis habliya, that none of these none of these offerings, none of these birds, if they are done in this way, are going to render the bird capable of transmitting impurity in a person's throat. What on earth are we talking about? Let's back up a bit and explain. So with animal carcasses, right, things that have not been processed correctly, they can contaminate with tumah by touching, right? But and that is because of tumas nevela, tuma imparted by a carcass. But it doesn't apply to birds. It only applies to animals, right? Kosher birds can transmit tuma if they haven't been slaughtered properly, but they can transmit the tuma when a person is swallowing the meat, when a person is swallowing the flesh of the bird. Okay, and that is called tuma b'beis habliya. That as a person swallows it, if it was improperly slaughtered, it can transmit tuma in a person's throat, and it can transmit tuma to him, and it can transmit tuma to his clothes as well. So there's two ways to make sure that a kosher bird is not going to transmit tuma. If it's not a sacrifice, then you have to slaughter it properly. If it is a sacrifice, then you have to do malika properly. But the Mishnah is saying that v'chulam, with all of these things, even if they are inappropriately done, like we saw in the last two Mishnahs, einam matamos b'beis habliya, they are not going to generate this concern of transmitting tuma in a person's throat. But the Mishnah says, umoalin bahem, they can create a situation where a person can violate the prohibition of me'ilah, misappropriating temple property. So if they didn't have permission to eat it, then they can create this violation of me'ilah. So if it was an invalid korban chatas ha'of, then it can create a problem of me'ilah. Except chutz mechatas ha'of she'asa lamata k'masei chatas l'shem chatas, with the exception of a properly processed chatas, which was done lamata, it was done in the bottom of the mizbeach, and it was done in the right way, and it was done with the right name, then there won't be a problem of me'ilah, and there won't be a problem of tuma either. Mishnah Daled. Going to be talking about situations where me'ilah may or may not apply. The Mishnah says, Olas ha'of, the bird ola offering, sha'asa lamata, which was done in the wrong place, it was done lamata, bottom half, kamasei chatas l'shem chatas, and it was done like a chatas, processed like a chatas, with the name of a chatas. Rabbi Eliezer omer moalim ba. Rabbi Eliezer says it's going to create a problem of me'ilah if a person misappropriates it. Rabbi Hoshua omer ein moalim ba. Rabbi Hoshua says that it is not going to create a problem of me'ilah if a person misappropriates it. The reason is, according to Rabbi Hoshua, you have processed it like a chatas, and so chatas is not subject to me'ilah, and so Rabbi Hoshua says it's not going to be subject to me'ilah. Amar Rabbi Eliezer is going to challenge this. He's going to say, Ma'im chatas she'ein mo'alim ba lishma, just like with a chatas ha'of, that if it was done with the right intention, it's not going to create a problem of me'ilah. Keshashina es shma, but if you were to change its name and now you were to call it something else, then mo'alim ba, then it would create a problem of me'ilah. So then, ola shma'olim ba lishma, so if you've got an ola which has been done properly, then in which case me'ilah applies. Keshashina es shema, so if you change its name, eino din shimalu ba, is it not logical to say that it's also going to still retain its problem of me'ilah? Why should it all of a sudden lose its potential to violate me'ilah just because you changed the name? Amar Rabbi Yeshua says back to him, look, this is not the case. You can't compare the two cases like this. If you want to say that with a chatas off, shashina es shema l'shem olah, where you've changed the name and it's now like an olah, sheken shina es shema l'davar sheyesh bo me'ilah, that you have changed it to something which could, in principle, create a problem of me'ilah, toma ba'ola shashina es shema, then if you flip that the other way, and if you've got an ola which you now change the name to a chatas, l'shem chatas, right? So you've changed the title of this ola in regards to a chatas. After the sprinkling of the blood, it can't violate me'ilah anymore because it gets eaten, right? So now that it's a chatas, shekein shema the davar she'ein bo me'ilah, you've changed it to something which doesn't have a problem of me'ilah. So Rabbi Yehoshua challenges back to Rabbi Eliezer. Says Rabbi Eliezer, Malo Rabbi Eliezer, v'harei kodshe kodshim. But what about kodshe kodshim, higher level sacrifices? Sheshachatan b'daram, which have been slaughtered in the southern side. U'shechatan l'shem kodshim kalim, and they get slaughtered with the intention, changing its designation for lower level sacrifices. Yochichu, this is going to prove you wrong, Rabbi Yehoshua. Shekein shina es sheman ledavar she'ein bo me'ilah, because there you're changing its name to a designation of a sacrifice that isn't subject to the problem of me'ilah. Umo'alin bahem, and then you're misappropriating it. Afalta al tisma ala ola, so then you can't be surprised by this ola. Sha'afal pi sheshina es shema ledavar she'ein bo me'ilah, that even though you're changing its name, its designation to something which doesn't have a potential for misappropriation, shi'emaluva, now it should indeed create a problem of me'ilah. Amalo Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Yehoshua says back to him, Lo, I disagree. Imamarta b'kodshe kodshim, you can't compare these things. Imamarta b'kodshe kodshim, if you want to say it by kodshe kodshim, sheshachatan b'darom, where you've slaughtered them in the south, v'shechatan l'shem kodshim kalim, and you've slaughtered them with a designation for lower level sacrifices, shekein shina es sheman, and you've changed the name to the davar sheyesh bo issa v'heta, and you've changed the name to something that has a designation where there is a problem of isur, there's a problem of the flesh, and there's a problem of v'heta, there's a problem of the there's a problem of the isur, which is the fats, which are capable of misappropriating, and the flesh, which is permitted. But now you want to try and apply that to an ola, which is kulo heta, which is there we go, where it's permitted in its entirety. So what it's saying is, the counter from Rabbi Yehoshua is, you can't compare the two, because you're talking about sacrifices on the one hand, which have this split problem of fats and flesh, and you're comparing that to a bird, which doesn't have that problem. So Rabbi Yehoshua counters Rabbi Eliezer. Mishnah, hey, that's a very tricky one to follow, and it's quite Talmudic in its approach, which is unusual. We don't usually see full-blown arguments in a Mishnah, but the halacha, it would seem, is actually like Rabbi Yehoshua. Mishnah, hey, if you get the malika wrong, okay, I'm not sure what I've written over here. let's have a look. Malak v'nitza treifa. No, we're on Mishnah. What are we on? Mishnah hey. Malak basmol or balayla. If you did malika with your left fingernail, which you shouldn't do, you should do it with the right hand, or balayla, or you did it at night, which is the wrong time to be processing sacrifices. Shochat chulin bifnim. If you sacrificed profane animals, where you should be doing shchita, but you've done it inside the Beis Hamikdash, where you should be doing malika, or v'kodshim bachut, or you've slaughtered sacrifices outside, which is the correct way to kill a bird outside, but you've done it to a sacrifice, which should have had malika. The Mishnah says, Einan metamin beveis habliya. If you do these things wrong, you're not going to create a situation where the flesh of this bird can transmit tumah when a person swallows it. Mishnah says, Molak basakin. If you do malika with a knife, and you shouldn't be, you should be doing it with a fingernail. Molak chulin bifnim. Or you've done malika of a profane animal in the confines of the Beis Hamikdash. Or the kodshim bachutz. Or you've done malika to a sacrifice, which you should do, but you've done it outside the Beis Hamikdash, which is the wrong place. Or torin shelo higiya zmanam. Or you've killed a turtle dove, which had not yet reached its required age to be useful as a sacrifice. Uvnei Yonah she'avar zmanam, or a dove which has gone past its sell-by date for a korban, or sheyovash gapa, or it's a bird who has a shriveled limb, v'shanis meis eina, or its eye is blinded, v'shanikta ragla, or it's missing a leg, metama b'beis hablia. In these instances, the birds can transmit tumah in the throat of a person if they were to swallow it. Zeh klal, the Mishnah says this is the rule. Kol shehaya pasula b'kodesh. Any time where the pasul, where the disqualification happens within the temple, metama b'beis hablia, then it's going to transmit tumah. V'chol hapsulin shemalku, anything which was disqualified already outside of the temple, and it gets snipped, it gets done malika to it, malikasan pasula, then it's going to be invalid, it's going to be disqualified. Ve'enan metamos b'beis hablia, but it's not going to transfer tumah if a person swallows it. Says the Mishnah, Mishnah Vav, the last Mishnah for this evening. We've got the correct malika of a korban, the correct shechita of chulin, and these will prevent the transmission of tumah. But what if it was a treifa? What if it was a bird which should never have been killed? What if the bird was chulin, and then you discover, what if it was profane, it wasn't designated as a sacrifice, and you slaughter it correctly, and then you discover it was a treifa? So what's going to happen? Is it going to prevent tumah, or is it not? So we're going to see three shitas, which I'll try my best to explain, but this wasn't an easy one for me. Malak v'nimsa treifa. You've done malika, and then you discover that the bird was treifa. It had something going on the inside of its body, which renders it forbidden for consumption. So Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Meir Omer, Eino metama b'veis hablia. So these things are not going to make it transmit impurity if it was to get swallowed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, metama b'veis hablia. They are going to transmit tumah in the beis hablia, in the throat of a person. Okay. Let's give this a go. Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, Ma'im nivlas behema, just like a carcass of an animal, right, which has not been slaughtered properly. Shehi metama b'mago v'masa. It's going to transmit tumah by touching it or by carrying it. Shechitasa metaheres es treifasa mitumasa. But if you were to slaughter it, if you were to slaughter this carcass, and it was to be found to be treif, then it could be pure. It won't contract the tumah of maga and masa. So that's by an animal. So if you were to slaughter a carcass, it would purify it. It would no longer transmit tumah. So then what about a bird? Nivlas ha'of. If you've got a carcass of a bird, she'eino metama b'maga v'masa, which does not transmit purity by touching or carrying, eino din shetahei shchitasa metahares eses treifasa mitumasa. So then surely it's logical to say that slaughtering this bird and discovering that it was treif should also mean that it doesn't transmit impurity even in the throat. Says the Mishnah, Ma matzinu, but how are we to say this? B'shchitasa shehi machsharta ba'achila. With a profane bird which gets slaughtered, you are preparing it, you're making it kosher for eating. Umetaheres es treifasa mitumasa. And so there, it will purify the bird if it was found to be treif. Af melikasa shehi machsharta ba'achila. So too with a sacrificial bird, where the malika makes it valid for eating, titaher es treifasa mitumasa. That too should purify a bird from transmitting tumah in the throat if it was found to be treifa. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, that since it applies to animals, it should apply to birds as well. Rabbi Yossi Omer, a third shita, Rabbi Yossi has a middle position somewhere in between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. He says, Daya kenivlas behema, I can see, or that it is sufficient to compare it to the carcass of an animal, shchitasa metaharta, where slaughtering a bird is going to render it pure, avalo melikasa, but not doing melika to this korban bird, that's not going to render it pure if it was then found to be a treifa. So very confusing, but the halacha seems to be like Rabbi Yossi anyway, that it seems to be a midway point, that slaughtering shchita of a bird is not going to render it transmitting impurity through the throat, but malika of a korban, if it's then found to be treif, that is going to be found to be transmitting purity, beveis habliya. Whew! Mazel tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing chapter 7. As I said, that was a pretty tricky one. Can't guarantee these things are getting any easier, but we're enjoying it, guys. And with that, for the recording, I wish everyone a wonderful and meaningful night, and we'll see you again next week for more